yourself. The recording is for internal purposes and to share the presentations for tomorrow's session. So I'm sure you're all really comfortable in Zoom, but just to remind yourself, if you can avoid distractions if possible, make yourself comfortable. We'll be together for just over 2 hours. Remember to mute yourself when you're not talking, just so you don't disrupt the presentations. If your bandwidth allows and you feel comfortable, we do encourage you to have your video on, but of course that's optional. As we've just demonstrated with the chat box, please do make use of that throughout the session with any questions, comments or reflections. And also when we're in the Q&A, you're welcome to use the raise hand function. And of course, we'll invite you to unmute yourself and contribute to the discussion. So today we're using Zoom's translation feature. So you'll see at the bottom of the screen, show captions. So you can select your speaking language as the one that you speak in, and translation to other languages as the one that you would like English to be translated to. So at the moment, this is quite a new Zoom feature, so it's not possible to translate from French to Spanish or French, to other languages. It's English to the selection of languages that you'll see there available in the toolbar. And as I'm probably not demonstrating very well, please, when you're speaking, do try to speak slowly and clearly, as this will aid the accuracy of the translation tool. Victoria, did you want to share those instructions in Spanish?
Yeah, sure. Just to let them know, this option for the translation part is shown in the More 3 dots section. So that's where you can, if you press the More options, then you can go into captions. So now in Spanish, colegas, para este seminario virtual vamos a usar la opción de traducción mediante subtítulos que encontrarán al final de la pantalla. Para acceder a esta opción deben ir a la opción que dice More, más, que tiene 3 puntos al lado derecho en la parte baja de la pantalla, y deben elegir primero el idioma para hablar en el que ustedes desean hablar, el speaking language, y también, y más importante, que elijan el idioma en el que quieren ver la traducción, el translation to other language, y que elijan ahí el idioma en el que quieren escuchar y ver los subtítulos en la parte baja de la pantalla. Les sugerimos que cuando comenten sobre o hagan preguntas, lo hagan de manera lenta para permitir que la traducción sea correcta, y que traten de reducir el uso de abreviaciones o acrónimos que pueden no tener una traducción exacta. Y avísennos si tienen alguna pregunta con respecto a esta opción de traducción. Please let us know through the chat if you have any issue or question regarding the caption translation option.
Great. I think there was a hand raised. I'm not sure if there is still a question there from, I think it was Vincent. So if you do have a question, please just type it in the chat, and one of our colleagues will support you. Okay, Victoria, would you like to run through the agenda?
Yes. Just now that we have more people on the call, I would like to welcome everyone to this webinar on REDD+ safeguards requirements in the current climate finance landscape. This event will focus on the requirements of key frameworks and standards, and how to build on existing country experiences on addressing and respecting safeguards in order to strengthen capacity to deliver high quality emission reductions. Addressing and respecting safeguards is a fundamental element of REDD+ readiness, implementation, and results-based payment, all the stages of REDD+. And the need to demonstrate high integrity emissions reductions has been highlighted and became more evident in the last years. And the application of safeguards has been brought to the front as an essential element of this integrity. So we have witnessed significant progress in REDD+ and in relation to safeguard elements associated to REDD+ implementation, but some gaps may still remain in some countries or regions, and also the application of safeguards still needs to be strengthened to ensure safeguards are addressed and respected, and REDD+ emission reductions are a product of a transparent, socially inclusive, gender responsive, and environmentally sustainable policies and measures. So in this evolving climate change environment for REDD+, in addition to UNFCCC requirements, there is a growing number and maybe new initiatives and funders, and they may have their own requirements or specific needs of information. So this event is not a comprehensive review of all the standards, all the initiatives and safeguard frameworks that are available, but a more target-focused review on some key standards and initiatives that have received increased attention in the last couple of years, and also the ones that are closely related to UN REDD technical assistance. So as we advance together towards the path of high quality emission reductions, while considering specific country circumstances, priorities, and capacities, we want to provide a space here in this webinar to review some safeguard requirements, clarify questions you may have, and also to promote a discussions on how existing progress safeguards processes at the country level developed in line with the UNFCCC safeguards guidance could be used or harmonized with other or multiple safeguard requirements that are relevant for the different phases of REDD+. All your comments, questions, and inputs are welcome. And even though we will have moments for questions and answers, please put your comments or questions in the chat at any point. Going to the agenda of this webinar, we will have an introductory presentation on UNFCCC decisions and safeguards related elements and advances to date to develop countries' approaches to REDD+ safeguards. This will be done by UNRED. We will follow with a presentation of two standards, the safeguard requirements under VERA's standards, and then the safeguard requirements under architecture for REDD transactions, and particularly the REDD+ environmental excellence standard, TREES, known as TREES. After some questions and answers, we will follow with a presentation from the Lowering Emission by Accelerating Forest Finance, known as LEAF Coalition, and their safeguard requirements. And this presentation will come from colleagues from Emergent. And we will finalize this discussion with some group activity or some gathering together to talk about learnings and recommendations for fulfilling the diverse safeguard requirements and build on what's already existing to try to tackle together some gaps or challenges that may still be present. Just briefly through the objectives of this webinar, we will review existing safeguard requirements of key frameworks and standards that I mentioned already. We want to share ideas and discuss on how countries' approaches to REDD+ safeguards as processes that have been developed so far to meet the UNFCCC safeguard requirements could be used to address other safeguard requirements. And we want to also identify opportunities, challenges, lessons related to meeting various safeguard requirements. That is all from my side as an introduction to this webinar. Welcome again. I would like now to pass the floor to Judith Walkup, my colleague, who will be providing the introduction presentation. And Judith joins us from WCMC, the World Conservation and Monitoring Center. She's a senior safeguards advisor and also part of the nature-based solutions team. And WCMC is working in a partnership with UN Environment Program. Please, Judith.
Thank you very much, Victoria, and good morning, good afternoon, and possibly good evening to colleagues. It's really great to see colleagues from across the regions, and also people who we've been collaborating with through UN REDD over the years, as well as people coming possibly new to the topic. So it's a really great space to exchange and to share. And we will have a lot of opportunities to ask questions of each other, of the presenters, and also to hear a little bit about country experiences on this very interesting topic. So safeguards requirements in the current climate finance landscape. I'll be focusing specifically on UNFCCC decisions and safeguards related elements and advances to date as related to country approaches to safeguards in my presentation. I'll also be trying to highlight where there are opportunities for synergies or harmonization or integration of different safeguards processes to meet multiple safeguards requirements. Just something to be keeping in mind as we then listen to other colleagues talking about safeguards requirements from different initiatives. Next slide, please. So I'll be starting just reviewing REDD+ safeguards and safeguards decisions under the UNFCCC, then country approaches to safeguards, again highlighting opportunities to integrate approaches or to respond to multiple safeguards requirements through unified or harmonized processes and approaches, and then talking about different experiences and advances on safeguard information systems and summaries of safeguards information. I invite everyone here to include any questions you might have in the chat, and also keep in mind that we do have these various spaces to exchange and to learn from one another in the space that we have today. Next slide, please. So starting with REDD+ safeguards requirements under the UNFCCC. Next slide. So first of all, thinking more broadly, why are safeguards needed? When we think about REDD+ activities and different specific actions that can be implemented under REDD+, which is focused on reducing emissions from deforestation as well as forest degradation, and then other activities related to sustainable management, improving forest carbon stocks. There can be potential benefits as well as risks for people and nature when implementing these actions. Potential benefits include more sustainable livelihoods, as well as improved access to natural resources. However, if these activities are not planned, implemented, and followed up on appropriately, there's a potential that they might cause harm for people and the environment. For example, if there's not an adequate decision-making process with free, prior, and informed consent with Indigenous peoples and local communities, for example, it could mean that some very key decision makers are excluded from decision-making processes. Therefore, we have safeguards in place which are measures to protect or to avoid or reduce potential risks and harms while promoting benefits. And I think this is one of the key aspects of REDD+ safeguards compared to maybe safeguards that a bank would have, which are very much focused on avoidance of risk. REDD+ safeguards, on the other hand, are focused on not only avoiding and mitigating potential social and environmental risks, but also enhancing and securing additional social and environmental benefits. These are sometimes called co-benefits or non-carbon benefits or multiple benefits. And this is one of the key aspects of REDD+ in general and not just of safeguards. So safeguards have this very important role in helping to avoid risks while promoting benefits and also helping to secure rights in line with relevant policies, laws, and regulations. Safeguards can help to improve governance, enhance transparency, and be an absolutely essential element to deliver high quality emissions reductions and to enable access to REDD+ financing or results-based payments. Next, please. Under the UNFCCC, there are three main requirements for REDD+ safeguards. The first is that countries promote and support the REDD+ safeguards, also called the Cancun safeguards, throughout REDD+ implementation. And I think this also would apply to the REDD+ readiness phase as well as results-based payments. So this means not just worrying about the reporting, but actually in terms of planning, implementing activities, making sure that safeguards are actually applied on the ground. There's also a requirement that countries develop information systems about how the safeguards are being addressed and respected. The UNFCCC, as those who are familiar with REDD and convention text decisions, do not specifically define what is meant by addressing and respecting. Therefore, it's very much up to a country in their own context to define what is meant by that. However, we could understand that addressed could mean what is in policies, laws, and regulations, what exists on paper to help support the application of different safeguards, while respecting is talking about more of what's happening on the ground. Are the safeguards actually being applied when REDD+ actions are being implemented? So an information system needs to be developed to report on both aspects, the addressing, what is on paper to support the safeguards, and respecting what is actually happening on the ground. Countries who wish to engage in REDD+ and receive results-based payments must also develop periodic summaries of safeguards information, which report on how the safeguards are being addressed and respected. So these are the three main safeguards requirements for REDD, and all of them need to be met in order for countries or jurisdictions to receive results-based payments. Next, please. So what are the REDD+ safeguards? I think we could probably have a whole workshop on this, and many of you probably will have participated in workshops on this, but just to review very briefly, safeguards are 7 environmental, social, and governance principles, which again look to avoid risks when planning, implementing, and following up on REDD+, while promoting benefits. Safeguard A relates to REDD+ actions in a country being consistent with other objectives in terms of national forest programs and international conventions and agreements. So this could be ensuring that the REDD+ national strategy or action plan in a country is also helping to promote a country's work on sustainable development goals, or can be in line with a country's commitments to the Convention on Biological Diversity. Safeguard B is focused on transparent and effective national forest governance structures. And again, this very much would depend on how a country contextualizes or interprets the safeguards in their national context. But for example, having mechanisms which allow complaints or inquiries related to REDD+ actions can be a key part of ensuring transparent and effective structures related to REDD+. Safeguard C refers to respect for the knowledge and rights of Indigenous peoples, as well as local communities. And Safeguard D focuses on full and effective participation of relevant stakeholders. These safeguards can be very relevant for ensuring that free, prior, and informed consent is applied appropriately, especially when actions relate to peoples and local communities. Safeguard E refers to REDD+ actions that are in consistency with the conservation of natural forests or native forests and biological diversity, and also work to enhance other social and environmental benefits. So there's actually safeguard text itself, which is reflective of the promotion of co-benefits or benefits beyond carbon. Safeguard F refers to actions to reduce or address risks of reversals to ensure sustainability. So this is referring to REDD+ actions which are not just successful in the short term. So you could implement actions to reduce deforestation, which are very successful over 1 or 2 years, but actually ensuring that there are plans in place that address the causes, both direct and indirect, of deforestation, forest degradation, so that the actions implemented are over the long term, that there are long-term sustainable results related to REDD+. Safeguard G refers to reducing the displacement of emissions. So this could be between different forest areas or between different ecosystems. And again, it's very much related to how REDD+ actions are planned and implemented in a way that address both the direct and indirect underlying causes of deforestation and forest degradation. This set of 7 safeguards principles, again, has very general wording. So many countries will have gone through national processes to interpret or to contextualize, to understand what these safeguards mean within national contexts, and how the national legal framework and institutional framework in a country helps to support the application of these safeguards, as well as there might be any gaps available that need to be strengthened through specific processes or actions. Next, please. So when thinking about country approaches to safeguards, next slide, please. This can present an opportunity not just to understand and contextualize what the different safeguards mean within a country context or a country individual circumstances, but to develop the necessary elements which will help meet the three main requirements of the UNFCCC under REDD. So it's something that can be very reflective of a country's approaches on safeguards, its unique needs and circumstances, the different stakeholders that are involved in REDD+, as well as socioeconomic, environmental issues, gender concerns. It's quite important that these approaches are built through participatory and inclusive stakeholder and engagement processes and reflect, again, national needs and contexts. Developing a country approach to safeguards can help to meet other national goals. It can help a country to achieve different sustainable development goals, goals related to gender, biodiversity, management of natural resources, to improve forest governance, and also to meet multiple requirements on safeguards to help access finance for climate and forests. The UN REDD program over the years has been developing and also supporting a number of countries to work with country approaches to safeguards, which are based around three core elements: policies, laws, and regulations, institutional arrangements, as well as information systems and sources. And these together can help countries to address not only the UNFCCC requirements on safeguards, but to actually develop flexible and integrated approaches to respond to multiple requirements. Next slide, please. So I won't go through all of the elements of it, but just to say that there are different indicative steps or elements of a country approach to safeguards, which would start with defining what is the scope and goals. Is it to meet UNFCCC requirements? Is it to meet multiple donor requirements or commitments? Is it just for REDD+ or just for the forest sector, or does it go beyond that? And then depending on what the objectives are, different processes and different activities can be implemented to help ensure that safeguards are addressed, which means that on paper, through the policies, laws, and regulations, as well as institutions, that safeguards are being properly addressed. But again, it could be just for the UNFCCC safeguards, it could be beyond that through more integrated approaches to address multiple safeguards requirements. Also ensuring that safeguards are respected, again, as this relates to what's happening on the ground and the actual implementation and application of safeguards to REDD+ actions, to ensure that there's appropriate capacity to apply the safeguards, to cover any gaps, to report on what's happening, to be able to have a continuous social and environmental management of REDD+ actions. And then for the safeguard information system, to define what the objectives of the system are. Is it just to report on UNFCCC requirements, or can it be more broader? And through these country approaches, which again will depend very much on country goals, country context, different financing opportunities, whether a system is going to be developed just for REDD+, or for the whole forest and land use sector, or for climate change objectives, but it presents different entry points and opportunities to have integrated approaches to address multiple requirements. Next slide, please. So I'll just speak very briefly about experiences and requirements on safeguard information system and summaries of safeguards information. We'll be sharing the slide deck afterwards, and I'm very happy to answer any questions on it. But just to provide some general information, as I mentioned, the safeguard information system provides information on how safeguards are being addressed and respected, and that's the basic function of a safeguard information system according to the convention. But again, it's up to a country if they want to base a safeguard information system in other systems, or use the safeguard information system to report on environmental and social aspects more generally for the forest sector, for REDD, for climate change, or beyond. The UNFCCC has general guidance on what a safeguard information system should have or should include. But again, it's very much up to a country to interpret this decision and guidance and develop systems that are most appropriate depending on country needs, country capacities, as well as thinking of overall sustainability of the system. But in general, it should provide transparent and consistent information accessible by all relevant stakeholders. And this is very important to link this up to who the relevant stakeholders are, how they would access and use information, and how best to ensure that it's communicated in a culturally appropriate and otherwise appropriate way for the different stakeholders. The system should be transparent and flexible to allow for improvements over time. I think it's very key that the decision under the UNFCCC isn't expecting perfection from the outset, but rather it could be a very simple system that is implemented and improved or has more complex operation over time, and also depending on needs and different financing opportunities. The system needs to provide information on how all safeguards are being addressed and respected. So there might be certain safeguards that are considered more relevant in REDD+ implementation, but the safeguard information system needs to report on all 7 of the safeguards as at minimum. But it could be up to a country or jurisdiction to develop a system that also reports on different safeguards beyond those of the UNFCCC. It must be country-driven and implemented at the national level and build on existing systems as appropriate. And we just have a little graphic here, which has some of the key functions that a safeguard information system could include. And I'm sure with Victoria, we can share further guidance from the UN REDD program. We've developed guidance and information, and also collected a lot of learnings and experiences from countries on their development of safeguard information systems, which we can share after this event. Next slide, please. So this graphic just shows international progress from REDD+ countries on safeguard information system development. And I think, Victoria, I don't know if you agree, it'd be really interesting to see how this has changed over time. There have been certain regions and countries that have made really strong and early advances. But it have systems that maybe have been more complex and have taken several years to develop. And I think other countries, while not, having any trade-offs necessarily in terms of quality, have in shorter periods of time, and also building on the learnings and experiences of other pioneer countries who have gone first, have managed to get really interesting and complex systems in place in short periods of time. I think thinking about a safeguard information system, and whether it's online or offline, whether it's a very complex technological system or solution, or whether it's something that looks more like an Excel table or as a simpler solution, again, is going to be a decision of countries, but it's very important to ensure that whatever is implemented is something that can be sustained over time, and that resource needs are also mapped to ensure that the operations contemplated in the system are in line with the funding available for it. But there have been some very interesting learnings and experiences over time on safeguard information systems. Next, please. Summaries of safeguard information are reports on how the safeguards are being addressed and respected within the context of a national REDD+ strategy or action plan. There's, again, some guidance from the UNFCCC on what they should include. So it should include specific information on which of the 5 main REDD+ activities or REDD+ activity are being implemented and reflected in the report. The national circumstances relevant to addressing and respecting the safeguards. This could also have information about different funding sources for REDD+ and different safeguards requirements. So a summary of information can also be another opportunity to unify and integrate and harmonize different safeguards requirements. It should include a description of each Cancun safeguard in accordance with national circumstances. And again, this would build very much on if a country in their country approach has had that phase of interpreting or understanding within the national context what the safeguards mean. It's important to report this information in a summary of information. existing systems and processes relevant for safeguards. And over time, as the safeguard information system is implemented and collecting and reporting information and has more complex operation, can very much feed into a summary of information. But initially, a summary of information can include information on other existing systems and processes in place, which can feed into the reporting on REDD+ safeguards. Also, it should include information on how each safeguard has been addressed and respected. Oftentimes in countries' first summaries of safeguard information, there have been a lot of advances in the country approaches on interpreting or understanding in the national context the significance, the meaning of each safeguard, and also defining how the safeguard is addressed in terms of the policies, laws, and regulations. And then as REDD+ implementation is continued or scaled up in countries, it's logical that more information would be collected on how safeguards are being respected. So in second or following summaries of information, it's expected that even more information will be reported on how safeguards are being respected. Other relevant information, which can include information from the national context, and again, could be an opportunity to respond to different safeguards requirements or to report on co-benefits of REDD+, or other. Summaries of information are key communication and dissemination tools for sharing information on safeguards and provide an opportunity for a country to show the social and environmental management of REDD+ and how safeguards are being implemented to generate confidence and to help access further climate finance for REDD+ and for forests. Next, please. So just briefly showing again progress on submissions of summaries of information. Quite a few countries have submitted their first summaries of information. There's a number of countries who are currently working on their second summaries of information, as this is a requirement to submit every 4 years. And there seem to have been several countries who submitted summaries in 2016, 2017. We're now nearing the phase when countries are working on their second summaries of information in some cases. And in other cases, particularly where it's tied to donor requirements or demands, as in the case of Brazil and Colombia, I think they're working on third, fourth, or even further summaries of information. But there have been a lot of progress across the regions, and again, a lot of learnings about what to include and how best to report information in a clear, concise, and easy to understand way for multiple audiences, as well as for donors. Next, I think I'm finishing there, but look forward to any questions in the chat and also discussions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Judith. Now, before we move into the next presentation, I would like to launch a very short poll to hear a little more about your expertise, whether you know on safeguards or not. This will only take 1 or 2 minutes. You will see the poll coming up in your screen soon. So please select whether you're an expert, know a lot about safeguards or not at all. And also we want to hear what kind of safeguards frameworks or requirements you're familiar with.
Apologies, we've had a technical incident and the poll may not appear. I just check with anyone else in the team if they can launch it.
Okay. And meanwhile, I would like to remind the participants that you have an option for caption translation available in your screen. If you click the more options, you then select captions and you can choose the language in which you speak and the language in which you want to see the subtitles at the end of the screen. Also the translation to those subtitles. And now I'll say the same because I see some colleagues join later in Spanish, and maybe Sarah, you can follow afterwards in French. Para los participantes existe una opción para traducción a los que se unieron después con subtítulos que pueden activar en las opciones de más, seleccionando el lenguaje en el que hablan y en el que quieren recibir la traducción.
Alors, pour activer ou désactiver les sous-titres traduits pour votre propre usage, dans la barre de menu en bas de votre écran, cliquez sur « Afficher les légendes », sélectionnez la langue parlée, comme la langue parlée, sélectionnez aussi « Traduction vers d'autres langues », par exemple le français. Et veuillez noter que cette fonctionnalité de traduction ne traduit pas l'anglais vers l'autre langue, c'est-à-dire que ça ne traduit pas l'espagnol vers le français. Lorsque vous parlez, essayez de parler lentement et clairement pour améliorer la précision de l'outil de traduction. Merci.
Thank you very much. I think we are seeing already the results in the polls. So we have a mixed audience, but I would say moving more towards the spectrum of having some people familiar with the safeguards, probably working in safeguard related areas. That is very good, kind of a more technical audience. And several people indicated they are familiar with the UNFCCC Cancun safeguards, but also an important group with the World Bank and FCPF related support and safeguard framework. And also some people are familiar with R3 safeguard requirements, LEAP safeguard requirements, the ones under VERA's standards. And people indicated that they are also familiar with other frameworks. Thank you very much for sharing this information. Now we would move into the two presentations focused on standards, or well, yeah, the chat wave. Also,
brief chat wave for the responses to Judith's presentation.
Yeah. So we will have a chat wave also to get a little more information from you. Could you put the first question?
Well, maybe just to explain if people have not participated in a chat wave before. So we will show you a question, but what we would like you to do is type your answer into the chat box, but don't press enter straight away, because we will give everyone 30 seconds to type, and then you'll press enter all together, and then we'll get a wave of answers. So this is how this technique got its name. And so, yeah, I will share the question now. Type, but don't press enter until Victoria tells you to.
Okay, could we see the question now? So what are key advances related to REDD+ safeguards that either you have made or support in a certain country, or that you are aware of in some countries? We'll give it a few seconds. So what are key advances related to REDD+ safeguards that you have made or are aware of in different countries or in a specific country? And please go now, share your answers with us. I'm seeing some information on safeguards information system architecture and design in place, web page development.
We have a hand raised from Vincent.
Yes, as soon as we finish this, maybe we can open the floor for Vincent. Access or elements of safeguards. Mainstreaming safeguards principles in REDD+ policies and measures. We are seeing the polls now. Frameworks applicable to safeguards, architecture of safeguards information system. Thank you very much. So please, yeah, keep posting any information on key advances that you're aware of or you have supported or know from countries. And now the second question. what is still missing for addressing and respecting REDD+ safeguards at the country level? So either from your experience in a specific country or a combination of countries, or the knowledge you have on the topic, what do you think there's still missing for addressing and respecting safeguards at the country level? So I'll give it a few seconds for you to think about it. What is still missing for addressing and respecting REDD+ safeguards? And now we'll give it a go. So please put your answers. What do you think it's still missing for addressing and respecting REDD+ safeguards at the country level? I see some answers on mechanisms and report of safeguards, of the voluntary market and projects in the voluntary market, harmonization and standardization of safeguard tools, a way to give operation to safeguards at institutional, national, regional, local level, follow-up and monitoring framework, indigenous peoples and local communities' land and tenure rights, ability to report related to safeguards information systems. Thank you very much. Feel free to continue sharing your insights on what is still missing, what are some gaps for addressing and respecting safeguards, REDD+ safeguards at the country level. We had one hand raised, so I would like to open the floor now. I don't see it anymore, but I think. Vincent, are you in? Please go on. Vincent, do you have a question or comment?
Oui, bonjour.
Oui, bonjour. Allez-y.
Oui, c'est moi qui venais de vous envoyer un message pour demander la traduction en anglais, en français, mais je n'ai pas pu. Mais d'après ma compréhension, vous avez présenté brièvement l'objectif du webinaire, l'historique de la REDD+ en parlant de la COP de Cancun, l'élaboration des politiques, lois, réglementations, les analyses, les arrangements institutionnels et les systèmes de sauvegarde. Et après, vous avez présenté la carte. Et sur la carte, moi, j'ai remarqué, ou j'ai constaté plutôt, que la REDD+ n'est pas très représentative en Afrique, surtout en Afrique tropicale. Et alors, comment faire pour relancer ou bien faire progresser la REDD+ dans certains pays africains? Parlant des garanties, il y a certains pays, l'essor du Tchad, qui a élaboré également le document, la feuille de route sur la garantie. Mais il se pose le problème de la mise en œuvre. Alors, c'est là où je voudrais avoir quelques éclaircissements. Comme ça fait un bon bout de temps, il n'y avait pas eu de réunion concernant la REDD+. Donc voilà, mais quelques soucis. D'après ma compréhension, comme je n'ai pas eu vraiment la traduction en français, mais avec mes petites notions en anglais, voilà, j'ai compris, j'ai parcouru, j'ai suivi avec attention vos présentations. Donc brièvement, voilà les grandes lignes que moi j'ai retenues. Et ma question pour finir, c'est ça, comment faire relancer ou bien progresser la REDD+ dans bon nombre de pays africains. Je vous remercie.
Oui, merci. Je pense que votre comparaison est très bonne de tout que nous avons parlé. Et pour la traduction, je vais commander mon collègue encore une fois de partager le message avec les captions, la traduction. qui est disponible, mais seulement les traductions écrites. Merci.
Merci.
The colleague indicated that he would like to know how we bring African countries on board, apart from tropical African countries, also to advance with safeguards elements, and especially to go beyond having a roadmap to actually implementing safeguards in the different countries in the Africa region. So he was asking to be also inclusive in that sense, to bring on board African countries and especially some countries who still need support to advance with safeguards implementation. So thank you very much. I would like now to introduce the floor to a presentation from Vera. A colleague, Basanta Gautam, will be sharing with us some information about safeguard requirements under Vera's standards. Basanta is the manager of the REDD+ technical innovation in Vera. Please, Basanta.
Thank you, Victoria. Could you please share the slides?
Yes.
If you could go to slides some more. Victoria, is it possible to put in the slides some more? Somehow I am just seeing the normal. Or maybe I think in the interest of time, maybe shall I continue? Yes. Yeah, thank you very much, Red, for inviting Vera to this webinar. This is indeed a very timely and very important topic that we all know. I'm Basanta Gautam, manager of REDD+ Technical Innovation in Vera. So I'll be presenting today about safeguard requirements under Vera's standard. Please, next slide. During this about 15 minutes time, I'll be covering these mainly four topics. So first I'll introduce a little bit about Vera, and then about safeguard requirements under Vera's standards, and what are the challenges and opportunities that we know so far when implementing safeguard requirements. So I'll be sharing some thoughts on these. And then finally, some of the links to the key resources so that you can check more when you get these slides later on. Please, next slide. So in these coming slides, I'll be talking about Vera and introducing Vera to you all. Please, next slide. So here, Vera was founded in 2007. And it is based in its headquarters is based in Washington, D.C. in USA. And we have more than 100 staff at the moment, but it's growing rapidly, as you may know. And also the matter of the fact that many of the colleagues who recently joined are working remotely, included myself. So the Vera is growing, and then also working very much remotely as well. Next slide, please. And here, these are the numbers. Actually, I took this screenshot from our registry. So if you want to know more about this, you could check our registry, which is registry.vera.org page. So basically just to show that the volume of the credits and the number of the projects that we have at the moment in our registry. And as you can see, there are more than 1,800 BCS projects registered, and also more than 1,500 BCS projects which issued VCU so far. And there are other numbers that you can see: the VCU issued, the VCU retired. So as I said, for more information, please do visit registry page, registry.org. Registry.vera.org. So next slide, please. Okay, so here you can see the 5 standards that we have at the moment. And during this presentation, I'll be covering first 4. So VCS Verified Carbon Standard, Jurisdictional Nested REDD+, so-called GNR, Sustainable Development Verified Impact Standard, so-called SDVISTA, and Climate Community and Biodiversity Standard, so-called CCBS. So I'll be presenting safeguard requirements of these 4 standards during my presentation. Next slide, please. So safeguard in Vera's standards. So I'll be focusing on now on the standards and the requirements of the safeguards. Next slide, please. Okay, so now it's a little bit more on the safeguard for particular standards. So in this case, I'm presenting about JNR. So safeguard requirements under JNR, jurisdictional and nested REDD+. We already heard about UNFCCC safeguards, so it is needless to say that our all standards comply with all UNFCCC decisions, in particular Cancun safeguard. And also we have in this GNR, we have provision of developing safeguard information system and with summary of information on how the safeguards are addressed and respected. So this is a safeguard information system is very much important for JNR. And in addition to the UNFCCC decision on safeguard and the Cancun safeguard standard, we do ask a project proponent to address relevant jurisdictional safeguard requirements, especially subnational level safeguards, because each countries have national and subnational safeguard, so they need to link with those safeguards that are already available in country or in local level. And then participation of rural and indigenous community, as well as private sector, academia representative, INGO, NGOs. It's very much in our, if you see our standards, and they talk, all the standards and requirements talk about these. So this is also very much important, and we value a lot, especially the indigenous communities and marginalized communities. So their involvement, their saying in the project development, and also during the monitoring phase, and also after the post monitoring. So we value a lot about their involvement in the whole process. And the second was the complementary safeguard certification. So those were like, they are required by the standard, but there are also some complementary certificate that we recommend to take advantage of, and they are particularly the UN REDD safeguard, REDD+ SCS, World Bank and FCPF safeguard, and the forest certification, forest FSC kind of requirement. So we always suggest the project proponent or jurisdiction to complement, to follow or to see what are the complementary safeguard requirements there are, and use the guidance from them. Please, next slide. And also it is very important to say that we do have the grievance and redress mechanism. So there should be like a GRM, functioning GRM available under JNR. And then another point is, which is very, very important if I say in my personal view also, is that the 60-day public comment period. So this public comment period is very important to get, as you know, the feedback from the stakeholders or any public who are relevant to the project, or who know about the project, want to say something about the project. So we have a 60-day public comment period. So during this period, we ask all the public to provide their comments, feedback, criticism, whatever they want to tell us. And then we, after the public comment period, these comments are published in our registry. So in the registry page, we have a project page, and then in the project page, we upload all the public comments there. So it's quite transparent as well. And then another important thing about this safeguard on GNR is that the VVB, the verification, validation and verification bodies. So this is also very important. The validation, this is very much independent and accredited, of course, accredited by VERA. What they do is that they validate the project in the beginning. Before, after validation only, they can register the project in our registry. But then we do also verification after once the project has completed and once they want to get credits, or in our case VCUs, then they have to be verification. So BBB is we strongly involve BBBs in all this process of assessing the later stage in the project. And after, depending on the BBB's recommendation, if they do not comply with any of the safeguards or any of the requirements, and there is no issuance of VCUs. So this is also, I would say, quite strongly mentioned here, no issuance in case of non-compliance. So it means that we value a lot about all those requirements and compliance in case of JNR. Next slide, please. Okay, now next two slides, I'll be talking about the VCS, Verified Carbon Standard Safeguard Requirements under VCS. And this is very basic requirement. I think in all our project, they do no harm. This is basic principle, and we do follow that. So we ask project proponent to identify and mitigate potential adverse environmental and social and economic impacts. And all these are also monitored and validated and verification by the VVVs. And the project proponent must engage and consult with the stakeholder throughout the life of the project. So it's not like that only in the beginning or in the latter stage of the project, but during the implementation of the project also, they must consult with the stakeholder and have their views and knowledge and interest, and as well as address their needs and expectations throughout the project period. And again, they should also maintain a functioning grievance and redress mechanism. Next slide, please. And in case of VCS, we have 30-day public comment period. So we talked about 60 days for GNR, but in case of VCS, we have a 30-day. And it's the same process of getting feedback from all the stakeholder or relevant people. And once we get these comments, the project proponent should address them prior to certification. So this is also they have to do. And we have complaints and appeals policy. So that we have template on our website. So they should follow. I mean, anyone wants to complain, they need to use this template, and they can submit this to us. And again, the VVB is also validating and verifying in this case as well, and no issuance in case of non-compliance, similar to GNR requirement. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the third standard, CCP standard, and in this case, they have to align with Cancun safeguard, but in this case, it's project level. So CCB standard is for project level at the moment. So because we know that Cancun safeguard has also the national requirement, so that they do not need to follow because of the fact that this is a project level. So it should be aligned, but at the project level. And the CCB standard safeguards requirements under CCB standard focuses on generation of net positive benefit, community rights, and definitely impacts on the biodiversity, and effective consultation in culturally appropriate and genderly sensitive manner. So this is also very clearly spelled out in our requirement, and that is section G of my presentation. I have links to those documents that you can also check later on. And then respect for rights to lands, territories, and resources, and this free, prior, and informed consent. So they had to have these also in place for CCP standards. Next slide, please. And this is the last standard, the SD Vista Sustainable Development Standard, the Verified Impact Standard, the requirement that I'm presenting here. And in this case, the stakeholder engagement is very important. So locally appropriate methods, so they need to use local language to identify, the local stakeholder, and also to communicate with the local stakeholder. They need to use local language, and effective consultation to influence project design and implementation. Because once you identify right stakeholder and you even use the local language and communication, local communication, then you can involve these stakeholders to effectively influence project design and implementation. And the third point is definitely no discrimination or sexual harassment. And again, provision of GRM is here as well in case of STD staff. And respect for rights to land, territories, and resources, and free, prior, and informed consent. This provision also is in the SD Vista, and that is section 2.4. Next slide, please. So in the next two slides, I'll be talking about a little bit our experience on these challenges and opportunity, and also link to the key resources. Next slide. So these are based on our experience so far. So because the challenges we see is that a safeguard information system is very important. This is very much needed, but this is also highly technical also, because it's basically the information system, which is IT system basically. So this, in my personal view also, because I was also involved with, before joining VERA, I was involved with some of these REDD Plus, National REDD Plus program to support developing safeguard information system. So this is challenging, and we need to train people. And also again, because this is basically so far the national approach, and in case of jurisdictional, we need to bring this in case of JNR, we need to bring this to the jurisdictional level. So there is some challenges, but we need to do some more work on that. And then often safeguards are qualitative targets, yeah, because they are more like social and community and biodiversity and so on. So it's a little bit difficult to measure as well. So if as far as possible, we need to also have quantitative targets with clear criteria and indicator, or I would say clear results framework, so that it's easily or it's possible to monitor later on whether we meet those targets or not. Whereas in qualitative targets, sometimes it's a little bit subjective as well. And we have BBBs, these verification and validation bodies, but we also do need to train or build the capacity of BBB itself, because they are the one who will check whether these will comply or not. Definitely VERA will check internally as well, but we get also their recommendation and suggestion. So in this case, because not all BBBs know all these safeguard requirements and so on, so we also see that there is some challenges of building the capacity. But it may not be the challenges, but just that we need to build the capacity as we move on the safeguard for all these standards. And the opportunity, that just two points here that I have highlighted is that especially in case of jurisdictional approach, because we are talking about transformational change and scale, and thereby the jurisdictional approach. Here, what we can learn from this is that we have a national approach for safeguard, And then we have, especially in case of Vera, we have VCS project in the project level, in the local level. So we can build the knowledge from or lessons from all these, from national, from local level to the jurisdictional level. So that I see as a great opportunity. And the second is that the jurisdictional engagement will ensure governance and safeguards. So because jurisdictional means that it involves the government, but as well as other stakeholders as well. So we feel that this will ensure governments on the whole program, but also particularly on the safeguard side as well. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. Here I have some links and with referring to particular sections that are relevant to safeguard. I understand that this presentation will be shared with you all later on. So please feel free to check those particular section. And if you have any questions, please get back to us. Next slide, please. So with this, thank you very much. I'm happy to answer or happy to participate in discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Basanta, for that presentation. Very interesting, especially the wrap-up part with some challenges and opportunities from your perspective. So it would be very interesting to discuss about those. Before we go into questions and answers, we want to have another perspective regarding its standards. And I would like to welcome Lucia Madrid from Art Secretariat, who will be presenting us the safeguard standards of trees. So Lucia, could you please share your presentation? And Lucia is a Policy Associate Director and part of the Art Secretariat.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I will try to share my screen now with you. Please let me know if you can see it properly. Can you see it in presentation mode?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I thank you very much. And thank you to you and REDD for inviting us to present in this webinar. As Victoria already said, my name is Lucia Madrid, and I'm Associate Director of Policy at the Art Secretariat at Windruck International. Today I will share with you more about our program and our standard trees and its requirements. Due to time restrictions, I will only cover some of the main topics that we get most questions about, those related to safeguards. However, I want to say what we have some recorded webinars in several languages that have complete information about all of our safeguards requirements, and they're tailored for jurisdictions and also for indigenous peoples and local communities. And they will be available shortly in our webpage. We will also soon have other webinars with more in-depth conversations about selected topics. And if you are interested, you can sign up for art news in our webpage, and so you will receive the registration information. So after this initial information, before starting with our main topic, I would like to review here the roles of art, that is our crediting program, and other stakeholders in the carbon market. Art means architecture for REDD+ transactions. Our program is a standalone program independent of governments, donor countries, companies, or other buyers, and we have standardized procedures for all participants. Our standard, trees, defines the requirements and procedures to certify emission reductions and removals from jurisdictional REDD programs. Art is more than just the standard. We also have an overarching program that includes components such as the Art Secretariat, comprised of every with knowledgeable staff, our independent board of directors. We have the art registry and our standard trees. Within the carbon market, the arts secretariat is in charge of arts program operations and maintenance. Each participant then develops and submits documentation outlining the REDD+ program and how it meets the requirements of trees. Each participant also selects and contracts a validation and verification body to independently verify the conformance with the standard. The validation and verification report is reviewed by the board, and once it is approved, ART issues carbon credits to the participant that are tracked in ART's registry. Once issued, the credits can be transferred to other entities that want to acquire them, and they can also be retired or canceled, which means that those credits will no longer be available to be transferred or used by any entity. The last stakeholder in the carbon market is the demand side. There are many possible buyers of trees credits. It can be countries, individual companies, or entities like Emergent that facilitates transactions for groups of companies and governments like the LEAF Coalition. ART is not involved in transactions or negotiation of the terms for emission reductions payment agreements, and all participants are free to sell their credits to whichever buyer they select, or can also develop other types of negotiations, such as receiving payments for results without the transfer of the credits to another country or entity. Trees includes requirements and procedures that ensure that Cancun safeguards are both addressed and respected, that promote the alignment with what countries were already doing, or how countries have interpreted the safeguards. Our requirements do not go beyond the substantive scope of the Cancun safeguards, and provide clarity on the expectations without prescribing approaches or procedures to respect country autonomy on design and implementation. Our requirements are aligned with current Cancun safeguards reporting requirements under the Barso framework for REDD+ that we have already reviewed in the UN REDD presentation before in the introduction of this webinar. We designed the requirements to be supplier friendly, allowing countries to build on their Cancun-based national safeguard systems, avoiding the development of new parallel systems only for participating with us. This means that each participant will address and respect the safeguards through laws, policies, and procedures that are appropriate to their circumstances. As a result, different participants will demonstrate conformance in different manners, but all trees, themes, and indicators will be met by all participants. The framework also promotes continuous improvement by requiring monitoring the outcomes, which helps evaluate and adapt the strategies as required. Trees unpack the Cancun safeguards into 16 key themes. Furthermore, to be able to validate and verify how each jurisdiction addresses and respects the safeguards, trees contains a structure, a process, and an outcome indicator for each theme. As indicated in the trees validation and verification standard, the review of the conformance with safeguards is equally important to the review of the carbon accounting accuracy. Structure indicators demonstrate that relevant governance arrangements, so policies, laws, institutional arrangements, are in place in the country or the applicable jurisdiction to ensure that design and implementation of REDD+ actions is done in line with relevant safeguards themes. These arrangements may be part of the national or subnational legal framework, or may be REDD+ specific arrangements. We do not require new laws to be developed only for REDD+, again, hoping that countries and jurisdictions can build on existing frameworks. In some cases, a jurisdiction may wish or need to do so, though. For the structure indicator for all themes, participants will need to identify the relevant arrangements and provide a summary on how each is relevant to their REDD+ actions. The process indicators demonstrate that appropriate processes, procedures, or mechanisms are in place to enact and enforce the arrangements outlined in the structure indicator. For the process indicator for all themes, participants will need to identify the relevant processes, procedures, or mechanisms, including responsible parties, and provide a summary of how each is relevant to its REDD+ actions. For the outcome indicator for all of our 16 themes, participants will need to identify and describe the selected monitoring parameters, including how a successful outcome is defined, monitoring methods to be used, and a summary of collected data. If the data analysis does not indicate a successful outcome, a description of how the governance arrangements or supporting processes, procedures, or mechanisms will be modified should be included. TREES does not specify specific parameters, as the ones selected should be appropriate to the circumstances of that jurisdiction. So not ones just arbitrarily selected by art. It is also anticipated that changes to the design and application of indicators will result from evaluation of the outcome monitoring. This is encouraged, but should be documented so the changes and the reasons of them are transparent to everybody. In the first crediting period, participants must conform with all structure and process indicators for each Cancun safeguard theme. In addition, they must either conform with or provide a plan for conforming with the outcome indicators. Within 5 years of joining ART, participants must demonstrate conformance with all indicators. No credits will be issued if the jurisdiction cannot demonstrate conformance with all of the safeguards. If a jurisdiction chooses to use the look-back period and wishes to seek credits for up to 4 years prior to joining ART, conformance with the safeguards must still be demonstrated for all of the years. Participants report to ART how they are complying with the safeguards through the registration documents and the monitoring report they deliver before each verification. Participants are also required to submit a summary of information report to the UNFCCC and to have a system for reporting information on safeguards. This system may be a sophisticated online digital system, or it may be a simpler analog system where information is shared to a central place in order to assess and develop reporting. Jurisdictions may use the TREES templates located on the website to report on safeguards, or jurisdictions may reference their summary of information reports that they submit to the UNFCCC. In some instances, other reports may also be acceptable to use to demonstrate conformance with the TREES safeguards. Our goal is to minimize the amount of rework a jurisdiction must do. However, it must be clear how the jurisdiction meets the requirements of each indicator in TREES. TREES safeguards and requirements apply equally to all participants, whether they are national or subnational governments. TREES does outline modified requirements in some cases, especially around the UNFCCC reporting requirements, which subnational government cannot do directly. Subnational governments must demonstrate consistency with national safeguards programs if they exist, submit a summary of safeguards information to the appropriate national government entity to be used in current or future national level reporting, and have an appropriate tracking system for safeguards data. As I mentioned, due to time limit, we will not review each of the safeguards, but we will focus on some selected topics that are usually of strong interest of many stakeholders regarding safeguards. The first topic we will look at more closely corresponds to theme 2.1 in trees, and it is regarding access to information. For the structure indicator in the trees documents, the participant should describe the national, subnational, or REDD+ specific framework that defines procedures for providing information on the design, implementation, and monitoring of REDD actions. The consideration of women, men, and female and male youth across all stakeholder groups is encouraged. For the process indicator, the participant describes the programs, processes, or other means to ensure the implementation of the procedures that were identified in the structure indicator. And how are these in line with the requirements? They have to describe who has the responsibility for doing this, how are they funded, how they decide what information and what format is appropriate. And these are all considerations for the process indicator. Finally, for the outcome indicator, participants should define and monitor parameters that demonstrate that relevant stakeholders have been aware of and have exercised their right to access information in line with the requirements identified in the structure indicator. The second topic we have selected is knowledge and rights of Indigenous peoples. 3 safeguards have 4 themes that relate to this topic. Hence, we require participants to respect, protect, and fulfill land tenure rights, identify Indigenous peoples and local communities or equivalent, respect and protect traditional knowledge, respect, protect, and fulfill rights of Indigenous peoples and or local communities or equivalent. Each of these themes, as explained before, has 3 indicators that are used to evaluate conformance. For its importance, I would like to explain the indicators under theme 2.3 as an example. There, the participant must first describe procedures for the recognition, inventorying, mapping, and securing of customary and statutory land and resource tenure rights, where REDD+ actions are implemented for the structure indicator. Then, process and resources for ensuring these procedures are implemented must be explained to meet the requirements of the process indicator. And finally, the participant must demonstrate that stakeholders had access to, use of, and control over land and resources in line with their rights. And this is for the outcome indicator. The third topic we are often asked about is consultation and participation. Regarding this, TRIS requires participants to respect, protect, and fulfill the right of all relevant stakeholders to participate fully and effectively in the design and implementation of REDD+ actions. As part of this theme, I would like to underline that the structure indicator indicates that part of this is to provide timely access and culturally appropriate information prior to consultations, among other elements explained in each of the indicators. As theme 4.1 is related to all relevant stakeholders and not only to Indigenous peoples and local communities, TRIS included an additional theme to exclusively address their participation. Hence, theme 4.2 requires jurisdictions to promote adequate participatory procedures for the meaningful participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities or equivalent. In this theme, the outcome indicator specifies that this participation should happen in the design, implementation, and assessment of REDD+ actions, and that it should be through the Indigenous peoples and local communities' respective decision-making structures and processes. In addition to the themes already discussed regarding access to information, land tenure, and protecting, respecting, and fulfilling the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities, Cancun Safeguard B includes several other aspects that contribute to benefit distribution. Theme 2.2 requires that the distribution of REDD+ benefits related to the implementation of the REDD+ actions have been carried out in a fair, transparent, and accountable manner. This ensures that benefits are distributed as agreed upon. In addition, theme 5.3 requires participants to demonstrate how they have enhanced social and environmental benefits through the REDD+ activities. TRIS does not specify what benefit sharing arrangements must be made, as we feel it is the right of each stakeholder to negotiate the terms and conditions that it feels best, rather than TRIS speaking for them and requiring certain things. However, our safeguards include numerous elements to ensure the process used for the negotiations is transparent, fair, participative, and respecting the rights of all relevant stakeholders, and that the resulting agreements are honored and implemented. There are multiple options to agree with all the relevant stakeholders regarding benefit distribution. The most common are as follows. Option 1, the government transfers TRIS credits to the stakeholder once they are issued by ART. In this case, the stakeholder would need to open an account in the ART registry. The jurisdiction would transfer TRIS credits to the stakeholder so that the stakeholder can sell the credits where it best suits them. Option 2, the stakeholder receives an agreed upon share of the money from the jurisdiction's sale of the TRIS credits to one or more buyer. And that's a distribution of money. Option 3, the stakeholder receives payments for environmental services or other financial incentives not linked to carbon credits specifically, as decided during the construction of the benefit sharing arrangements. Option 4, the stakeholder receives non-monetary benefits, such as land titles, infrastructure, or others. It is important to note that a jurisdiction can also agree a mix of these options to address the specific interests of all the relevant groups. Other options, if agreed, that are also permitted as long as the process to agree them respected the safeguards. Of course, each of these options has different associated transaction costs, which is important to consider when selecting one or more of these options. Finally, in the topics that we have selected for you today, we have a theme regarding access to justice. This is a TRIS safeguard that requires dispute resolution mechanisms at all relevant levels and in a manner that is non-discriminatory and non-cost prohibitive. In other words, it is a grievance mechanism, but at all levels, where it is appropriate to actually address the issues, rather than simply a requirement for a national level, for one national level grievance mechanism. The outcome indicator requires evidence of the effectiveness of this process by requiring that to resolve disputes, competing claims, and effective recourse and remedies have been provided when there was a violation of rights, grievance, dispute, or claim related to the implementation of REDD+ actions. Some topics are not explicitly part of the Cancun safeguards, but they apply across all themes. So they do not have a specific theme of their own on their TRIS. This does not mean that they are not important. For example, TRIS safeguards guidance indicates that participants should respect, promote, and consider principles of gender equality and empowerment of women when implementing REDD+ actions. This gender considerations should be taken into account when addressing, respecting, and reporting on all of the safeguards. Our last topic today covers how safeguards are validated and verified under ART. TRIS requires validation to occur after year 1 of each 5-year crediting period, and verification to occur after years 1, 3, and 5 of each crediting period. Verification will be optional following years 2 and 4 of each crediting period. However, no credits will be issued without verification. Each participant jurisdiction must hire a validation and verification body to conduct an external verification of all the results that have been reported by the participants, including the carbon monitoring elements and the safeguards. Validation and verifications are conducted in accordance with the TRIS validation and verification standard. To start, the auditors check whether the information in the reports show that the participant meets all of the requirements of TRIS. And it is important for jurisdictions to be as clear as possible in these documents explaining how each safeguard indicator was met. This will help the validation and verification be as efficient as possible. Then the auditors confirm that the information presented is complete and correct by reviewing evidence and conducting interviews of many different stakeholders. The specific evidence requested by an auditor will depend on the activities and information for that jurisdiction. They can review carbon evidence, remote sensing images and analysis, procedures for training employees, etc. And also they will be reviewing safeguards evidence, such as consultation materials, signing sheets, meeting minutes, records that they have, records relating land tenure and titling processes, etc. As you can imagine, a significant amount of work is required to complete the validation and verification of ARS requirements. However, we feel that this is a very important step in ensuring the requirements of TRIS, including safeguards, are met. Well, that's all we have for you, and thank you very much for the opportunity on presenting.
Thank you very much, Lucia, for that useful presentation. Now I would like to open the floor for the participants to ask questions regarding both presentations, the VERA's standards and their safeguard requirements, and also the safeguard requirements under R3s. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand. We may have time for some comments, but please be concise to allow other participants to comment or pose questions as well. Do we have any hands raised or questions, comments? I already saw a couple of questions regarding VERA's presentation, which were related to how a country chooses to use one standard or the other, Basanta, if the country decides to, on this part, if there's any interaction with VERA or guidance on what standard to apply. And also, if you could provide a little more detail on the governance of safeguards that was mentioned in the opportunities part, if you could provide more details. Let's go with those answers, and then we can go to Lucia, because I saw a question related to R3s.
Thanks, Victoria. Shall I go ahead with answering those?
Yes, please.
Yes, thanks for these two important questions. So to answer the first question, who chooses to use a specific standard? So it's basically either project proponent or government. They have to decide, because VERA, also the fact that we also need to evaluate the project and also monitor it. So we are not like giving any kind of like consultancy kind of services. However, we will help to clarify our standards. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us, and we will clarify if there are some confusions. But we cannot say that you use either this or that, or so this is up to you based on your understanding. Normally, the practice so far is that the project proponent or government, they hire some expert who have some experience of developing such project, and they advise them to use some particular standard. So we are happy to help to understand the standards, to answer or to clarify if you have any questions, but we are not in position to say that you use this or that. So that is the answer to first question. And the second question, I mean that actually because in jurisdiction, as we say, jurisdictional level program, because it involves all the stakeholders also. So we hope that this helps us also to build the governance of the safeguard. I mean, because the fact that it involves the stakeholders that are there out there in the jurisdictions. So that was my point there.
Thank you very much. I don't know if there are other questions. I see one maybe less related to safeguards, Lucia, but I don't know if you have any comments on how are organic soil carbon credits considered under our trees, and whether a government could be certificated with those, and perhaps also linking it to another question. There's a comment particularly relevant for Africa region indicating that with a long menu or a set of requirements related to safeguards, and that this could be a challenge for some countries, is there room for flexibility, or how would you consider this flexibility approach?
Thank you, Victoria. Well, the first one, as it is not about safeguards, but more about carbon accounting, I would ask you to send that question to us so that the technical team that sees all the monitoring, reporting, and verification of carbon accounting can answer that by email. And then, so about the flexibility in the safeguards requirements. Well, what I'm in trees, what we have is that from the first year that they of their crediting period, countries have to demonstrate how they meet structure and process indicators, but they also have more time to show how they meet the outcome indicators. So I think that's a good way so that the countries, the jurisdictions have time to have all the monitoring in place, and they are not pressed to have evaluated the results from the beginning. Also, it is important to know that many jurisdictions have already developed their safeguards frameworks before, thanks to their work already ongoing with the UNFCCC. And in trees, we recognize all the work that has been done before. So they don't need to do extra or additional types of reports, as long as, of course, all the safeguards indicators, the structure and process ones are already met, but they can use their own safeguards systems, their own summaries of information, etc. And I think the next question is also for art, so I will just, if that's okay. It says, in the event of a country working on art standard for leaf, where there are existing Vera certified projects, how are the safeguards harmonized? And well, in this case, right, regarding to us, that is, the jurisdiction has to prove that safeguards are met in their REDD program and within all the process of the REDD+ implementation. We do have rules regarding double issuance and double counting. So the carbon credits that have already been issued for REDD projects in that country will be subtracted from trees jurisdictional credits. But what is going to be evaluated regarding safeguards is how they were made through the jurisdictional REDD+ program.
Thank you very much, Lucia. We have one hand raised, so please, Patricia, go on with your comment or question. And feel free to share your comments in either in English or your own language.
Hello, I will try English. This is Patricia Patron from the Ministry of Environment from Peru. Sorry that I cannot put my camera on because the technical problems. Well, very quick questions to Vera. How do you take into consideration the national interpretation of to address and respect safeguard? Like maybe you mentioned it, but I didn't get it. And the second question is very interesting that you say that the report on the compliance of safeguard is public for 30 days. So I want to know, how do you do this? If you can explain a little bit more about this, where do you publish this information? How is the experience? No, do you send it by mail to stakeholders, or like, I would like to know about that, because I think it's a very good practice related to safeguard. Thank you very much. I hope it was clear.
Thank you, Patricia. Basanta, may I pass the floor to you so that you can answer that question, and perhaps as follow-up, we also have another question in the chat that we can mention afterwards.
Thanks, Victoria, and thanks, Patricia, for the questions. If I understand your first question right, you are asking about the national interpretation of the whereas safeguard, right? Just to be clear.
About the national interpretation, no? Like, for example, Cancun safeguard, we have a national interpretation. So how do you take it into account in the process to audit, or like when you use your standards?
No, basically, because Cancun safeguards are same for all, right? So there are these 7 safeguards we're talking, and all program, if they refer to Cancun safeguard, it means that they refer to all the 7 safeguards. So I think that there should not be any problem of interpreting the safeguards. But just the thing is that we have JNR, as I mentioned, jurisdictional and national REDD plus, sorry, the nested REDD plus, and the VCS project, verified this carbon standard project. So these are not the national so far, especially in case of jurisdiction. It's not the national one. It's going to be a sub-national approach in so-called jurisdiction. So personally, I do not think any issue with interpreting the safeguard at national level. But if you have any specific example, please reach out to me, and then we can discuss bilaterally on that. And the second question about the comment period. So this 30 days comment period is not just for safeguard, just to clarify. This is comment for whole projects. We publish this on Vera's website, and also on our social media, the links to the social media. And we give 30 days to the stakeholder to submit their question, comments, criticism, so by email to us. And these will be recorded on Vera's registry site for that particular project. So anyone can access those comments that are there. So this definitely includes safeguard requirements also, but not just the regs for safeguard. This is just for comments for the whole project, including safeguards.
Okay, and may I ask you also, to looking at the last comment in the chat, it was asked if you have additional information on this challenge or potential challenge that was mentioned on having only certain qualitative information, and that sometimes more details are needed to report about outcomes. An example is provided on, for example, full and effective participation or generation of co-benefits, whether you have additional guidance on, how to encourage the information sharing on more like outcomes related, or if you have any examples or reference materials regarding this topic. And then I'll pass the floor to Lucia, which is on the other side, an example on how qualitative information could also be an important part of the reporting and evidence of showing conformance with safeguards.
Yes, thanks, Maria, for the question. Again, just to clarify, I did not mean that the qualitative reporting requirements are a challenge, but just that the challenge in the reporting I mean, when we see the indicators, once we have in one side we have criteria and in another side we have indicator, when monitoring and also during the validation, it is difficult if we do not have like quantitative target, it's difficult to verify. So that's what I mean. And definitely all these core benefits and all the qualitative reporting requirements are very important, and these are part of the whole REDD program, right? Because we cannot just talk about numbers. We need to also talk about how it affects to the life of the people, also the local situation and so on. So it doesn't mean that just having some numbers there. What I mean that if we could have some quantitative indicators on those qualitative requirements, that would be great. So this is what I mean. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Lucia, would you have something to add regarding the reporting that you have been seeing from countries related to R3 safeguards indicators?
Yes, well, I'm thinking of there are countries that have developed not only for art, but as part of their own safeguards information systems and safeguards program, and that of course those can be used to demonstrate conformance with our safeguards. There are countries that have like really interesting examples, and I wanted to maybe use Ghana as an example, because they have this framework where they have selective qualitative and quantitative indicators for each of their safeguards. And I would just mention an example of a qualitative and a quantitative that they are using. For example, they have a qualitative indicator that the name is description and evidence of how vulnerable groups are involved in decision making. That's their qualitative indicator. And then they have, in that same theme, they have quantitative indicators such as percentage of women in decision-making bodies and governance groups at all levels, or percentage of vulnerable groups, so landless, elderly, aged, the youth, and women involved in decision-making bodies and governance groups. So I just wanted to share that each country is doing it in a different way, and that there are countries that have made a lot of progress in already identifying qualitative and quantitative indicators to show how they meet safeguards themes.
Thank you very much. I do not see at this stage any other hands raised or additional questions. If you have some questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand if you want to speak up, and you can continue posting questions until the end of the webinar. We will do our best to address your questions. Now, I would like to pass that we will continue with this conversation. I would like to bring Paz Lozano to our last presentation, that would be on LEAF Coalition safeguard requirements, and this is closely related to R3's presentation. You would see soon why I'm telling you this. So I would like to welcome Paz to present the safeguard requirements under R3. And I believe it's maybe two colleagues, Paz and Dion Ward, who join us from Emergent. Paz is a Senior Vice President of Forests in Emergent, and Dion Ward is the Director of the Fund Management and Reporting also at Emergent, and they are also part of the LEAF Coalition.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I'll start off the presentation and let me share my screen really quickly. But just to clarify, we won't be presenting on the actual R3's safeguard requirements, as Lucia has already wonderfully done that. But we will be talking about how LEAF uses the art trees standard in order to guarantee that there is high integrity, there are high integrity requirements met when it comes to safeguards for any credits that we transact under the LEAF Coalition. So thank you so much. Let me share my presentation and hopefully everyone will be able to see my screen. Please let me know if you have any issues.
We can see it clearly.
Perfect. All right, so I just wanted to give a little bit of context for everyone on the call about who Emergent is and what LEAF is. So it's important to just land in this kind of information or provide some clarity on this. Emergent, the organization that Dion and I work for, is a nonprofit organization that provides a transaction platform for art trees credits. As Lucia mentioned, we are effectively one of the buyers, one of the many kinds of buyers that can exist for art trees credits. We, as Emergent, we buy and pay for jurisdictional REDD+ carbon credits that are issued under the trees standard. And we sell those credits to corporate purchasers and sovereign donors who are participants in the LEAF Coalition. We're also the administrative coordinator of the LEAF Coalition, and we facilitate those transactions for LEAF participants, as I mentioned. The LEAF Coalition itself was formed in April of last year, and the goal is really to halt tropical deforestation by financing large-scale tropical forest protection. And we are bringing together forest nations, companies, and donor governments to facilitate these transactions of high integrity trees credits. The LEAF Coalition, I think it's important to emphasize, the LEAF Coalition is not a greenhouse gas program or a standard, unlike Vera or ART. We are just a collection of different buyers and participants in effectively the carbon market. So all trees credits that are transacted by LEAF are issued by the ART program under the trees standard. A little bit more information for everyone on how we work, how Emergent and LEAF works, just really high level to make sure it's clear. So effectively, we start by aggregating demand for trees credits. So LEAF corporates and sovereigns that are participants in LEAF Coalition indicate their demand or their interest in purchasing trees credits from different jurisdictions and forest governments that are also participants in LEAF. Once sufficient demand for credits has been aggregated and there's a solid value proposition that we can provide to a jurisdiction, then we move into the phase of negotiating and ultimately signing an emissions reduction purchase agreement with both the corporate buyers and the jurisdictions who will be selling their trees credits. Then it's the hard work for the jurisdictions to actually reduce deforestation, to implement activities that really generate results and emissions reductions. And they have to do so in conformance with the trees standard requirements, which includes the safeguards, which Lucia has already talked about. Once those results have actually been achieved, once the jurisdiction has monitored the emissions reductions, then they actually go through a process of independent validation and verification against the trees standard requirements. And if upon successful validation and verification, trees credits can be issued by ART and then ultimately retired on the ART registry when they're transferred to a buyer or when the jurisdiction receives payment, they can, for results, they can also retire the credits in their own accounts. So this is an important part of the process, and this is where ART, we rely on the ART program in order to not only issue the trees credits that we transact, but to also provide the platform, the registry for retirement to ensure no double counting. Once those trees credits are issued, ultimately the Emergent, we transfer funds to jurisdictions, to the LEAF jurisdiction that has entered into this purchase agreement and delivered us the credits. And we do that through a financial intermediary. who then oversees, monitors, and reports on the funds, the use of funds according to best management practices for fund management. And those funds ultimately end up being reinvested in sustainable development and forest protection, generally speaking, what the jurisdictions decide to use those funds for within that kind of broad category. And that reinvestment in these different activities ultimately going to impact the lives and livelihoods of people in those jurisdictions. And we hope creates this virtuous cycle where more emissions reductions can be achieved and more payments can then be delivered for the results that the jurisdictions can demonstrate under the ART tree standard. So this is a high level kind of flow of how things work under LEAF and ART, or not ART, LEAF and Emergent. So what are LEAF's safeguard requirements? I think this is something that we want to highlight in two kind of phases, and I'll speak more about the first phase, a pre-credit issuance phase, and my colleague Dion will speak more to what happens post-credit issuance and post the delivery of funds to the jurisdiction. So pre-credit issuance, the simplest way to say this is that we ultimately require that any jurisdiction that participates in a LEAF transaction meets the requirements of the ART program, the TREES standard. So TREES was selected by LEAF because of the buyer's confidence in its high integrity requirements, and in particular because of the really robust safeguard requirements that exist within the standard. So like I said, any jurisdictions that transact credits through Emergent and LEAF have to have those credits independently validated and verified under TREES and issued by ART. Post-credit issuance and delivery, so once the jurisdiction has actually demonstrated they met the requirements, they've issued credits, and they've delivered those credits, we've paid them, then there's a different set of safeguards that comes in, and this is actually what is really specific to LEAF. Like I said, the first phase is really governed by ART, but we do require that jurisdictions effectively participate in the ART program. However, once the funds are transferred, there are safeguards that apply to monitoring the use of proceeds under LEAF. So those fund management reporting safeguards are a LEAF specific requirement, and we take measures to ensure that there's no duplication of safeguards reporting requirements with ART trees. We recognize there can be some overlap, but we want to make sure that efforts are complementary and they're not duplicative. And finally, it's important to note that post first credit issuance or post other issuances, jurisdictions are expected to continue to demonstrate compliance with the TREES safeguard requirements and just all TREES requirements throughout the entire crediting period lifetime under ART, which is 5 years, and also to ensure that they deliver the credits that have been included for those vintage years under the emissions reductions purchase agreement, the ERPA. So just to delve into a little bit more depth on what information we require related to pre-credit issuance within that kind of time frame. So I'll delve into this in a little more detail before I pass it over to Dion. So I want to kind of clarify this because I know there's definitely been some confusion on these different requirements prior to ERPA signing, prior to signing a purchase agreement with a jurisdiction, and after signing a purchase agreement. So I want to go into a little depth on what we ask for related to kind of some of the safeguards that Lucia mentioned in her last presentation. Ultimately, prior to ERPA signing, as Emergent, as a buyer, we are really interested in understanding what kinds of benefit distribution mechanisms or agreements or plans have already been developed or under development within the jurisdiction. We also are really interested in understanding what the processes are that have been implemented or under development within that jurisdiction for stakeholder engagement and consultation. And we're also interested in the status of the implementation plans, whether or not jurisdictions have already finalized those or if they're in progress, right? So we ask for information related to those categories, those three broad categories of things that relate to the art trees standard requirements, so that we have some visibility into the readiness of the jurisdiction and what still needs to be completed before they can actually ultimately meet all the art trees requirements and issue trees credits. So this is really the purpose that these pre-ERPA signing requirements serve, is to provide us some level of information on this. So for jurisdictions that have already completed or initiated the validation and verification process under ART, they've actually finalized their documentation and submitted it to the ART Secretariat. We just ask for copies of the relevant information or documents that relate to benefit distribution, stakeholder engagement, and implementation plans. But for those jurisdictions that are still in the process of preparing to meet the trees requirements and preparing their documentation and their monitoring reports, et cetera, under ART and have not yet submitted that documentation, prior to signing an ERPA with them, we ask that they provide us essentially a status check or an update on what they are doing to be able to finalize these different components before they issue, trees credits, right? Just to understand the timeline for delivery and the timeline that it might take them in order to meet the standard requirements. I want to just emphasize here that we do not require jurisdictions to submit finalized benefit sharing mechanisms or plans or any finalized stakeholder engagement processes or implementation plans prior to signing the ERPA. We just ask for effectively a status check on where they are now and what their plans are to ensure that those things will be in place within a reasonable time frame to ensure they can deliver trees credits when they've promised to deliver them. So I want to make sure that that's very clear. We don't want to rush that. We don't want to ask for that to be done in 2 months, because at the end of the day, this could compromise the jurisdiction's ability to meet the standard requirements themselves. And jurisdictions must conduct, all the consultations and develop benefit sharing agreements in conformance with trees requirements. So we want to make sure that that's done correctly, and the time that's needed to do that correctly is actually taken. So that's something I want to emphasize. For post-ERPA signing, jurisdictions must demonstrate compliance with tree safeguard requirements. So like I said before, we only deliver payments to jurisdictions once they've actually been able to demonstrate that they've successfully passed validation and verification against the trees requirements. So moving on, just really quickly to highlight some different topics that a sample of different topics that are priorities for leaf buyers. This is not to say that not all of the tree safeguard requirements are important. They are all important for leaf buyers, but here are a few that I think are really important to emphasize that buyers are paying particular attention to, and some of the ones that Lucia already has emphasized and mentioned in her presentation. So one is the full and effective participation of relevant stakeholders. This is something that is extremely important for all of the buyers involved, that Indigenous people in particular and local communities in particular are consulted and involved in the process and are broadly supportive of the program and initiatives. We also care about benefit distribution mechanisms, plans, or agreements that are developed with stakeholders in a participatory manner. And like I said, in particular with a focus on Indigenous people, local communities, and other marginalized groups. And we also care about the promotion of gender equity across the implementation of safeguards and the implementation of trees of the REDD+ activities. And finally, we also are really interested in ensuring that the rights and knowledge of Indigenous people and local communities are respected. And these are all things that the art tree standard effectively guarantees through their processes. So, but this is a particular reason why buyers are really supportive of art and the tree standard. So I'll pass this over to Dion to talk a little bit more about the post-issuance requirements as they relate to safeguards for fund monitoring and reporting. Dion?
Thank you, Paz, and thank you, Victoria, you and REDD staff, and all the participants for giving us an opportunity to clarify some of these concepts. So I'm going to talk mostly just in a few minutes about the use of proceeds and post-credit issuance requirements. Pause next slide, please. To localize us on the cycle, which Paz already presented in the last 2, 5 and 6 of the circle, we have the financial intermediary who we depend on to distribute funds in alignment with the use of proceeds plan, which has been defined by the host jurisdiction. This is after the verification, after issuance verification, and then this process of disbursement. I'm going to focus on this as well as the reinvestment and the oversight and monitoring of the use of proceeds. So next slide, please. So there's some premises that Paz has already gone over, and the importance to understand ARC-Tree's safeguards, and that this is focusing on post transaction of emission reduction credits safeguards, what we call fund management and reporting, our jargon here. And it's essentially the financial intermediary that ensures that key financial, social, and environmental safeguards are reinforced all along the activity chain, from when they receive the funds, their internal policies, and then when it's distributed to implementing partners. Paz mentioned that you're providing, respecting country autonomy, and that the host jurisdiction is the one that defines the use of proceeds within their existing NDC ambition and sustainable development goals. I'm going to discuss a little bit what some of the variation and how that might differ potentially from what the crediting period activities are, but I'll go into that in a minute. We are, as Paz said, very wary of not having duplication of what the verification bodies are looking at, and coordination with what the FI is monitoring. We recognize within the 5-year period that there is some overlap, there will be, and it's important for us to just continue that coordination, not to provide opportunities for existing frameworks to be emphasized, and for there not to be undue effort, extra work for either the host jurisdiction or the implementing partners. LEAF is as we said, and Emergent specifically is working with financial intermediaries to look at the results from the country reinvesting in that virtuous cycle, as we said, for forest protection, REDD+ activities and or other sustainable development activities. Next slide, please. This we think is a helpful Venn diagram that helps lay out both temporally and thematically, contrasting the ARC implementation period, the crediting period, and how there's activities where the ARC-Tree safeguards are applied. Then there's the use of proceeds, which we are monitoring through the FI, that in some instances, it will be the same, reinforcing existing REDD+ programs and ongoing policies. In some instances, there'll be new initiatives that the government chooses to fund, and that go beyond the REDD+ plans, might include sustainable development goals in alignment with NDCs, et cetera. So I just wanted to let that settle in a little, because it's important that we understand we're looking at the monitoring of use of proceeds. That's what the fund management and reporting world that I work with entails. Next slide. So we're hammering home once again that part of compliance is first meeting ARC-Tree safeguards, and then we have some, when we're talking about any additional safeguards within the emission reductions purchase agreement, there's a stipulation around some additional financial safeguards that reinforce Cancun safeguards specific to anti-corruption, anti-bribery, and anti-money laundering measures. Those are enforced on down through the use of proceeds for the implementing partner activities as well. Financial intermediaries are an important actor. We've mentioned we're leveraging their capabilities that have been proven through their GCF accredited entity accreditation process that ensures robust frameworks. And we lean on those existing policies and frameworks for the financial management, oversight, accountability, as well as their safeguards monitoring capacity. As long as the proceeds are flowing from the sale of emission reductions through the financial intermediary, there is that drawdown of safeguards and oversight that extends to implementing partners. So we asked the financial intermediary to look specifically at human and labor rights. Any discrimination or abuse is prevented, and they are once again comply with those financial safeguards which we mentioned. I believe one more slide. That the financial intermediary capabilities, both and the safeguards monitoring capacity, refer to their internal processes. We have a list of 10 key capacities that relate to both their processes as well as the engagement and distribution and monitoring of the activities that the downstream implementing partners, as they're using the proceeds for activities and actions on the ground. So code of ethics, procurement policies, preventing financial irregularities internally and downstream, payment procedures, know your customer checks, internal controls, investigation procedures and grievance redress mechanisms. We don't mean to have this be duplicative, and we want to be able to reference existing trees mechanisms, the importance of making sure that it's suitably communicated both internally and downstream for all participants to be able to raise any issues. External audit function for the fiduciary responsibility is extremely important. Systems on monitoring and reporting on the use of funded activities. We lean on the intermediaries' capacities and capabilities, both for that as well as their existing policies. The IFC policies are referenced within the GCF accredited entity framework on E&S risk monitoring, as well as prevention of sexual harassment and exploitation. So that is a summary of a lot, but I really wanted to have the opportunity to focus on the separation of those different periods and the use of proceeds versus the crediting period verification that precedes it. So with that, I think that ends our presentation.
Thank you very much, Paz and Dion, for your presentation. I'm going to open the floor now for questions. Either raise your hand if you want to share your question, or put it in the chat. It can be related to the last presentation from Emergent, or maybe if you have any other burning question related to past presentations, or a link between the 3 presentations, feel free to share that.
If there aren't any questions, I just want to note that, we're also available to answer any questions directly. So please feel free to reach out to myself or Dion with any further questions. But yeah, Farah, please go ahead.
Yes, hi, good morning. Well, good evening or good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to ask regarding the lift, the presentation, like, do countries have to comply with R3 in the sense that they have to actually demonstrate that they are complying with the results, like after, right, the indicators of results? Because it's kind of hard to achieve those indicators, especially when we're talking about like implementing a policy or plan. So how I didn't catch that part. Could you explain?
Yeah, I can explain that. And really the important thing to note here is that when it comes to demonstrating outcome indicators, jurisdictions have to meet the ART-TREE standard requirements. So whenever ART requires that jurisdictions meet those results or those outcome indicators is effectively when we require that. So we're not adding any extra level of requirements on top of what ART already requires when it comes to their conformance with the standard requirements. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Does that make sense? And Lucia, maybe if you wanted to add anything, please feel free, but I want to make sure it's clear that we're not adding any additional requirements to ART on that particular point.
No, and what I want to say is that before issuance of trees credits, who actually verifies the conformance with the process, structure, and outcome indicators is the validation and verification body. How it works is the jurisdictions send a report, a monitoring report to ART, which is then verified by a validation and verification body that it is approved by ART. And once that validation and verification process is finished, because maybe in the process also there are some non-conformances that can be then resolved by the jurisdiction. Also, it's not something that it happens once and it's fail or pass. Is the validation body will come, they will maybe have non-conformances, their jurisdiction will have time to solve those non-conformances, and then when the validation and verification processes are closed, all of that is reviewed by the arts board, who then approves the issuance of the credits. Once the credits are issued, you can understand that the safeguard indicators were met, and then a buyer, when that can be Leaf, of course, or can be another buyer, will know that those credits were developed as part of a REDD initiative that conform with the safeguards. Yeah, so what I understand from Paz's presentation is that they don't require anything extra regarding the Cancun safeguards as part of their what they have.
And thank you. If I can just insert also that beyond obviously the safeguard indicators that are consistent with the Cancun requirements under our trees, for use of proceeds, emergent is not prescriptive in asking for particular milestones, or we want to share positive results from the host jurisdictions and their partners. And so we lean on the FI to help monitor results, but there isn't a prescriptive way in which we ask for that. The FIs provide an annual progress report. And when I mentioned that there's an overlay between the different vintages, which we're calling them within the 5-year crediting period, there's going to be, for those things that are the proceeds that are reinvested back in continuing ongoing REDD Plus program outcomes, there will be overlap and consistency with some of the safeguard monitoring that the VBBs are looking at. We will create opportunities for there to be transparency and communication between that monitoring process and the monitoring of the use of proceeds that the FI is conducting. So it's trying to understand those periods, the thematic similarities as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions or comments? And if you still need to digest some information, to think about what you have heard today, feel free to reach out to us and let us know if you have further questions. I believe we will continue this discussion and working together towards maybe innovative or efficient solutions for advancing with safeguard processes while we continue to strengthen the capacities at the country level and encourage the integrity of emission reduction results. I do not see any other questions or comments at this stage. We have a couple of messages, additional messages. We are reaching the end of the event, but we have a couple of next steps to share with you regarding the materials and what is coming from our side, from UN REDD. So Jessica, could you please share the screen to show the board that we created? You will receive a link to this board together with the materials of this webinar. We want to hear more in case you have comments on, or you want to think about what is common requirements, what are different requirements, and also if you have inputs on challenges, learnings, and recommendations to strengthen safeguards application. So we want to keep the conversation open so that you tell us more about this. This information is not attached to names or organizations. So you can just put your inputs. You can also comment on someone else's inputs if you see that. This is like a platform, a board for you to share any information, and also you can put a click and put thumbs up in ideas that other colleagues will have. So we will share this board with you, and I encourage you to share more information. This information will be very useful for our internal work planning, for UN REDD work planning regarding our support next year. So we want to hear about all of you, what you think are important challenges to consider, learnings or examples that are worth sharing from countries, regions, projects, also recommendations. And if you have any ideas or key common requirements that you are seeing are common elements among standards, initiatives linked to the UNFCCC safeguard requirements and Cancun safeguards, and also if there are any different requirements or particular elements that you would like to highlight. So that is all from our side. Now we would, you will see in the screen also a poll coming. It would take you only 2 minutes to answer to the questions again. We want to hear about your opinion of the webinar. And if you have any recommendations, you can put them in the chat regarding what worked well, what did not work, what would you like to hear more about? If there are any topics related to safeguards, to REDD+ safeguards that you're very interested in, please let us know so that we can take them into account for coming knowledge exchange events during the next year. And I would like to take opportunity to thank all the speakers, all the presenters. This was very useful. Thank you for taking the time to share information with all of us. I hope the participants found this useful as well. And we can continue discussing about how we can work together towards an effective application of safeguards, reduction of rights, but also promotion of social and environmental co-benefits so that we can encourage high integrity emission reductions. I see a hand from Lucia Vera. Go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick question. I think tomorrow there is another meeting, but it's at 8 a.m. London time. I don't know if the meeting is going to be recorded because like in Peru, it's going to be 3 a.m., which is kind of inconvenient. So I don't know.
Thank you, Lucia. Very, very useful comment. That is another option for this same webinar. So we are offering this webinar 2 times at different days and time frames so that colleagues located in Asia Pacific, for example, can also benefit from this information. So the same information shared today will be the topic of tomorrow's webinar. And we will be sharing, yeah, please put the poll up if you can so that we get a quick feedback on the webinar. And we will be sharing the materials, as we said, You will receive the presentations, also the recordings of the presentations, and some additional reference materials. We will use the information you shared in the registration page to do so. I cannot see the poll yet.
Sorry, Victoria, I'm sharing, but maybe depending on the Zoom version you have, not everyone might be able to see. I'll just review the results quickly. Thanks to those who participated. So it seems like everyone thought on a scale of 1 to 5, content of the webinar was between 3 and 5. All of the responses fell, so 31% gave a 3, 23% gave a 4, and then 46%, the majority of those who replied, gave a 5 in terms of usefulness. And then in terms of effectiveness of the methodology, it's about evenly split between 3 and 4. While most of you thought it was a 5, it'd really be great to hear some comments and suggestions about how we can improve the methodology for future events. So please do feel free to reach out in the chat or contact any of us via email. We're always looking to improve. And then on a scale of 1 to 5, if this has contributed to your understanding of safeguards requirements, 8% answered 3, 54%, the vast majority of those who replied answered 4, and then 38% answered 5. And then 92% of those who replied are interested in joining future webinars on safeguards topics, 8% possibly. So we'll definitely make sure to keep everyone apprised of future safeguards events. Thanks.
Thank you, Judith. It was very useful. Thank you very much all for joining. Hopefully we will continue this conversation next year, and we will reach out to you to let you know about future events related to REDD+ safeguards. And thanks again to Vera, Art Secretariat, and Emergent, and to you, Judith, from UNRED side for your presentations.
Thank you, UNRED, for organizing this great webinar.
Thank you for the invitation.